For better or worse, and let's be honest, it was usually worse, DC television in the 2010s was entirely defined by the CW, which managed to create the most coherent live-action DC universe between a slew of different shows called the Arrowverse, which is also what I started this channel about. Now, I say for better or worse because these shows were never exactly great. The bad ones were pretty dreadful, and the good ones only really managed a handful of good seasons before usually falling apart. One of these shows that was never really good, Supergirl, introduced us to Tyler Hoechlin's Superman, who, despite being treated horribly by the not very good writers of Supergirl, always gave off quintessential Superman energy to me, which felt like a breath of fresh air in comparison to the big screen portrayal. Because of this, I always saw such great potential in a spin-off show, letting Tyler Hoechlin out of the Supergirl bubble and into something of his own. This was only propped up by the casting of Elizabeth Tulloch for the Elseworlds crossover, and that brings us to Superman and Lois, initially airing in 2021, then acting as the newest entry in the Arrowverse. Superman and Lois quickly proved to be something more, something of higher quality that, kind of rightfully so, did not want to be held back by the Arrowverse's canon and all of the Superman villains and Superman characters that were already used on Supergirl, for instance. Season 1 truly shocked me with its quality, between the excellent writing, the great performances, the chemistry between the leads, which by the way was vastly improved over their previous appearances in Elseworlds and Crisis on Infinite Earths, the cinematography, the almost unbelievable usage of its minimal budget, and the shocking twists and turns throughout the season, which all came to solidify this as already my personal favorite live-action portrayals of Clark Kent, Superman, and Lois Lane. Season 2 definitely was not quite up to par with the first, as a prevailing issue with the series started to become a bit apparent, which is the focus on the Lang-Cushing family, which doesn't always feel entirely necessary, and little bits of teenage drama being a bit annoying. Also, the villain of that season, Ali Alston, was pretty awful. Still, the season had an interesting twist of its own and gave us a really compelling adaptation of Bizarro, who remained important in both of the next seasons going forward. Season 3 was an entirely different beast, feeling like a bit of a different show from Season 2, which was also physically shown by the recasting of John Kent, and at times being a bit boring due to a lack of action. The season nonetheless had a very, very strong emotional core, focusing on Lois having cancer, tackling the story with grace and care, doing something all the best Superman stories do in my opinion, put him into a situation where he is powerless despite his insane power. That season focused on Bruno Mannheim as the villain right up until the introduction of Lex Luthor, which culminated in this epic cliffhanger, which led perfectly into Season 4, maybe the show's best season. Season 4 brings DC's time on the CW to a close, and in a pretty excellent fashion. The season started really strong with this 3-episode kind of first arc, loosely adapting the death of Superman, a story that has been adapted a lot, but I think for good reason. It's the most popular Superman story, and also it works more often than not. This particular adaptation was not, in my opinion, the single best, as it's not on par with the animated movie, but it's also light years better than the DCEU, making it the best live-action adaptation of the story, and it's not close. Things go rather fast. Clark is only truly dead for one full episode, but given the small amount of episodes in the season, I felt like that was warranted. Either way, I loved what they did here. Clark's death was emotional, and Superman's death was powerful, but I feel like the show did a lot more with how he was brought back and then the consequences of his death than even the original story. Sam Lane sacrificing his life, giving his augmented heart to allow Superman to return, was a really fantastic moment, an incredible end for that character, and a really clever way of allowing for Superman to return from the dead, but only as a one-time thing. It also made it so Clark now has a human heart, which began to weaken him and allowed him to age regularly, and that people started to figure out that Clark is Superman. So, how he returned, and then the consequences of both his death and return, made the fact that he ever died feel a lot more impactful than it usually does, because it had real consequences on both his body and identity, and I thought that they were absolutely perfect for the final season, as this version of Superman got a true ending, something you can't really say about any other live-action adaptation. I'll get back to that. In that same episode where Sam died and Clark returned, John Kent finally got superpowers, a moment the audience has been clamoring for since day one, and it absolutely did not disappoint. That was a genuine cheer moment for me, and not the last of the season. John finally getting powers was so satisfying. The following 2 episodes I thought were a tad bit underwhelming and didn't quite keep up the momentum that the first 3 episodes cultivated, and also they were frankly a bit bit boring at times, especially with all the focus episode 4 put on the Cushing side of things, which are all scenes you can kind of just entirely skip. And then also episode 5's focus on Lex and his daughter, which was a lot more surprising in that it was underwhelming. This feels like a good time to talk about Lex Luthor. After season 3 had ended, I felt like the show had the opportunity to create something special here, a great live-action Lex Luthor, something that has been accomplished surprisingly few times. In season 3, he had a really strong aura to him and felt like a genius manipulator. I'm not entirely sure what changed, but I didn't feel nearly as much of that aura in season 3, and I don't think Lex ever came off as highly intelligent as he should. What's more, his motivation kind of falls apart on episode 5, where he's shown to hate Lois Lane more than he loves his daughter, which could fit the comic book Lex Luthor, or at least it would if he was hating Superman, but it doesn't fit the Lex Luthor that they created up until this point, like, at all. It doesn't help that the scenes between him and his daughter were not engaging at all in their writing, but also I feel like the show simply jumped the shark a bit with his character and motivation, to the point where in the last few episodes he kind of just comes off as batshit crazy and cartoonishly evil. That did make it so that his defeat was really satisfying, and he's certainly still a better live-action Luthor than most live-action portrayals, especially the DCEU one, but he is not to Luthor what Tyler Hoechlin is now to Superman, or Elizabeth Tulloch is to Lois Lane. Also, while it was cool to see him in a power suit, and the fact that they made his heads-up display green and purple, I was really frustrated that they didn't paint the suit green and purple, which would have been just absolutely perfect, but alas. Also, Milton Fine was a very disappointing character. If the show had more seasons, they probably would have revealed him to be Brainiac like he is in the comics. Instead, he ends up being just some hacker guy who they call a Brainiac at one point, and then never anything more, which was a cool nod and everything, but also it kind of makes this character the worst live-action portrayal of Brainiac ever, as if there were really any great ones. I said Lex's defeat was satisfying, but more than that, the beating he took from a powerless Superman was truly one of the best moments of the season. The build up to it, the intensity of the scene, the gorgeous cinematography in the rain. I mean, this is a beautiful looking scene, which also, for some reason, contrasted strongly with the episode up until this point. Like, there was this one feeling to the episode, this one look to the episode, and then you cut to this, and the rest of the episode, it looks and feels entirely different, definitely in a good way. This was a Superman scene like no other, and the clear and absolute peak of an otherwise quite underwhelming rivalry between what should be arch enemies. I say quite underwhelming, not that it's bad, it's just not the typical Superman and Lex Luthor rivalry, which is second only to maybe Batman and Joker as one of the best in comics. That episode built its momentum right into the next, which was an even more unique Superman story dealing with the consequences of his identity starting to get out. The focus this episode put on the way Clark's secret has held him back, especially from forming a true friendship with Jimmy Olsen, and how his secret has begun to erode current relationships and lead into harmful gaslighting, was the perfect setup for a powerful identity reveal moment. The Smallville-style slow-mo bullet, Clark slowly taking off his glasses, the look of approval from Lois, the shirt rip, the bullet bouncing off, and the incredible music made for one of the most powerful Superman moments in live-action history. Somehow, Candace's dad was a part of two of the best moments of this show, and both in the diner. Then, the way the rest of the episode deals with Superman officially revealing his identity to the world is just as good. I didn't personally love this adaptation of Jimmy Olsen very much. He's not ginger, and I found him to be a tad bit annoying, but I think what they were going for generally did work. The following episode was one that I didn't love either, which is just 3 episodes in the season that I didn't love, and when I say I didn't love, I don't mean I disliked, I just didn't love it. Tom Cavanaugh appears as G. Gordon Godfrey, which is cool, but I don't actually love that casting either. I feel like Godfrey should feel a lot sleazier, but also have a lot more energy. Some of the action was really great, but also looked quite cheap. This is a general issue with the season that I do have a hard time criticizing it for. The season had a budget cut compared to the previous 3, which is noticeable, but I am just beyond impressed by what they were able to accomplish on what sounds like a tiny budget. The show was already not a high budget show, and then it also got a budget cut. There were moments where the CGI looked really bad, and the season generally did lack action, but there are also moments where the cinematography blew me away, where the CGI looks incredible. I mean, that final Doomsday form, for instance, was peak, and there were a handful of really great fight scenes. The budget did make it so that many of the actors couldn't appear throughout, but honestly, that was only really felt when John Henry and Nat didn't show up to help. Otherwise, I'd consider it a positive since it forced them to put heavier focus on the core 4 characters, which honestly kind of improved the season. I was beyond impressed by what the season was able to accomplish on its budget, so I can't really fault it much. Then, the penultimate episode, if nothing else, did a good job of setting up the finale finale, even if it was a tad boring at times up until the end. It put a big focus on Amanda, whose relationship with Lex was a relatively interesting one, and whose character I found to be a bit more complex than Lex was, at least in the final few episodes. Still, it was only in the end where things got really good. I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. The final Doomsday form is absolutely incredible, a perfect adaptation of the design, with CGI that, at least in this one scene, looks great in sunlight. This just puts BVS to shame. I mean, consider the budgetary differences. It's absurd how it's only the movie version that looks awful, and this cut budget CW show looks so good. Not just the design, this might be my favorite portrayal of Doomsday ever. The series somehow managed to turn what is typically a raging monster into a compelling character with a sad backstory, a unique connection to Lois, and an eventual acceptance of his death through flashbacks to remind you of who he was, which was not only a powerful moment, but it also made the series feel more connected together. Those were all scenes from back in season 2, and they're only all being paid off right now, 2 seasons later. I guess since I already started to talk about it, let's go over the finale. Titled It Went By So Fast, Superman and Lois has easily the best series finale of a DC CW show and delivers an exceptionally moving ending to this version of Superman. I will say there are elements of this episode I didn't love, and I'm starting with those because the episode starts with them too. The beginning isn't great, the focus on Lana and John feels a bit weird, there are moments that look a bit awkward, Doomsday is defeated very easily and really quickly. The episode picks up from there though. I love the Doomsday in the sun scenes, I already mentioned that, also because they look beautiful. Lois taunting Lex was a great moment, even if John and Jordan were far too easily defeated. The final fight between Superman and Lex was pretty awesome, with some fantastic sky visuals, and one incredible final shot of Lex's defeat. Like I already mentioned earlier, this is one of the peak rivalry between Superman and Lex Luthor moments. And like I said, Lex's defeat was satisfying, even if, like Doomsday, it came pretty quickly. That first half of the episode is the season's finale. The second half is the series' finale, and is definitely where the episode truly shines. Or rather, it's actually in the last 15 minutes. Jumping 1 year into the future, there are a good 5 minutes dedicated to Lana and John's wedding, which in and of itself is nice. I like those two together, I like that they got that ending, and I didn't think it took up too much space. But also, it did allow for some of the other side characters' closing scenes, some of whom I care a little bit less about, like Lana, Sarah, Kyle, and Chrissy, all of whom had fun, if a bit unmemorable scenes. But then there's John and Nat, easily the standout of the non-4 core characters of the series, in a beautiful scene of John and Nat reminiscing over their old world and their Lois in front of a starry night sky with beautiful music in the background. A fantastic closing scene for these honestly fantastic supporting characters. We're also given closure in regards to Lex, who is just completely defeated and incapable of taking control of the prison he's in again, which was nice, but it's right after that where the episode, and maybe even the series, peaks. This last section of the episode and this last section of the series is entirely narrated by Clark, and are absolutely beautiful for just about the entire time. Starting strong with John and Jordan finally be given costumes, adapting the original and the new 52 Superboy suits respectively, while Steel finally gets the super logo and cape to complete the look. Also, Nat gets a super logo as well, leading into this really cool shot that was another cheer moment for me of the super family flying together. I would have preferred for Superman to get a brighter suit, at least for this one scene. In fact, I loved his suit in this season. It's easily the best of his, except it's too dark. If it was brighter, it might be the best live-action Superman suit up until this point. I absolutely loved the following montage of Clark and Lois growing old together and the Kent family continually growing. It all just reminded me of the first few minutes of Up. Lois's eventual death is handled beautifully, getting me genuinely emotional after 4 seasons of getting attached to what is now, in my opinion, the best portrayals of Clark, Lois, and easily the best portrayal of their relationship in live-action history. This then became a bittersweet moment as Clark adopted a dog named Crypto, which I couldn't help get excited about. And finally, that brings us to the ending. The moments depicting Clark's death are a true masterpiece. Beautiful music, incredible narration, it looks great, great acting through just facial expressions, a true expression of family, friends, forgiveness, joy, hope, and wonder, all culminating in one final kiss between Superman and Lois, the center of the series, and somehow not at all corny focus on love. These last few minutes were magical. That's something I actually said while watching the episode. This is magical, turning this otherwise already really good season finale into an exceptional series finale and cap off to the quintessential live-action Superman of the modern day. A fantastic ending that also feels so appropriate given the new, young Superman arriving in less than a year. I love this show. It's obviously not perfect, it's very much held back by its budget. Some of the focus on the side characters aren't great, some of the decisions aren't great, but this is easily the best DC show on the CW, staying relatively consistent throughout its 4-season run, with just one season that wavers in quality. I said at the beginning of the episode that this might be the best season of the show, but honestly I'm not entirely sure about that. Seasons 1, 3, and 4 are all pretty much equal in quality, doing certain things well differently from each other and without a clear best. The fact, however, that this show remains so consistent throughout, especially given the budget cuts of this final season, is highly impressive. So at the very least, DC on the CW went out on a high.